So let's talk about something really interesting. One of those stubborn little quirks of the human mind. We're going to call it the overconfidence paradox.
Okay, let me ask you something, and be honest. Are you a better than average driver? Come on, think about it. If you're like, well, pretty much everyone, you probably just thought, yeah, I'm pretty good. But hold on a second. Here's the catch, right? Statistically, that's just impossible. By definition, only half of us can actually be above average. So how can we all think we are? This isn't just some funny little thing. It's a really deep bias that tells us a lot about how our brains work. So let's dive in and see if we can figure this out.
Okay, so our journey here starts with a pretty famous puzzle in psychology. And for the longest time, everyone thought the answer was super straightforward. This thing has a name. It's called the better than average effect, or BAE for short. And scientists have seen it for decades in study after study. We just consistently think we're smarter, funnier, more ethical, and yeah, better drivers than that average person out there. For ages, this was just chalked up to, well, that's just human nature. But then things got complicated. When researchers started looking at this across different cultures, the data started to look, well, kind of messy. It turns out this universal effect wasn't quite so universal. So take a look at this. It's from a huge analysis of tons of studies. For people in Western cultures, that better than average effect is massive. You can see it, a really high positive score. But then you look at the data from East Asia, and whoa, it's way, way weaker. I mean, it's still there, a little bit positive, but just barely. This was a huge puzzle for researchers. I mean, why would such a basic human tendency be so different from one place to another? Well, it turns out the problem wasn't with the people they were studying. The real problem was with the study itself. So a few clever researchers started thinking, wait a minute, what if the way we're asking the question is actually creating the very thing we're trying to find? And what they found was this hidden little bias they call the EBTA effect. It stands for everyone is better than their group's average. See, the thing is, our brains are just not good at picturing a vague, faceless, average person. It's too abstract. So when you ask us to compare anybody, ourselves, a friend, even a random person, to this blurry average, we almost always say the specific person is better. So the scientists got smart. They changed the question just a tiny bit. Instead of saying, how do you compare to the average student, they started asking, how do you compare to a random, specific student? It sounds like the same thing, but it's not. It's brilliant because it gets rid of that bias. Now you're comparing one real person, you, to another real, specific person. And check this out. This is the aha moment. Look at what happened with the Japanese participants. When they used the old method, comparing to the average, you see that small little positive bias we talked about. But when they switched to the new method, comparing to a random person, the whole thing flips on its head. It actually goes negative. Instead of seeing themselves as better, they rated themselves as slightly worse. The illusion just, poof, disappeared. Okay, so that's one part of the puzzle. But this connects to something even deeper going on inside our heads, something that's not just about how we see other people. It turns out our brains are fiercely protective of our ego. We really, really want to have a positive self-image. And one of the wildest ways our brain accomplishes this is by, well, actively messing with our own memories. Yeah, researchers have actually identified something they call motivated forgetting. It works like this. Step 1, you get some negative feedback. Let's say your boss says you're disorganized. Okay, ouch. Step 2, your brain quietly goes to work in the background and it starts to weaken the link, the connection between the word disorganized and the idea of me. Then, step 3, later on, you might remember the conversation. You'll remember someone was called disorganized, but you kind of forget that it was you. It's an incredible, sneaky little trick our minds play to protect us. Exactly. Like the researchers said, we selectively forget the connection. The memory itself is still there, floating around, but the string that ties it directly to us, snipped. So this all leads to a really big question, right? Why? Why would our brains evolve these super complex ways to fool ourselves? It really seems like a design flaw, like a bug. But what if it's not a bug at all? What if it's a feature?
Okay, so we've got these clever mental tricks to make ourselves feel good. But why on earth would we have them?
I mean, from a survival of the fittest point of view, wouldn't it be way better to have a super accurate, realistic view of ourselves?
Well, there's this really fascinating model that came out in the journal Nature, and it suggests something totally counterintuitive. It argues that in certain situations, being overconfident could actually be the best strategy for survival and passing on your genes.
And the logic behind the model is actually pretty straightforward. Imagine you're competing for something important, like food or territory. The model shows that when the prize is really big and the cost of trying to get it is pretty low, the best strategy isn't to be realistic. It's to be overconfident. And this is the absolute key. The person who's overconfident is just more likely to go for it, to challenge someone for that resource. Sure, they might lose sometimes, but because they enter more fights, over the long run, they end up winning more stuff than their more careful, realistic friends. In other words, a little bit of self-deception can actually lead to more success. All right, so let's put all the pieces together now and see what the big picture looks like. So we started with a simple question about being a good driver, and look where it's led us. We've learned that we're hardwired to see ourselves as better than average, but that's partly because of a weird mental glitch in how we think about average. We've seen how our memory system actively works to shield our ego by snipping the wires to bad feedback. And maybe the biggest surprise of all is that this overconfidence might not be a mistake. It could be an evolutionary advantage that helped our ancestors win. And that leaves us with one last, kind of wild thought to chew on. If all these little biases, this tendency to see ourselves through slightly rose-colored glasses, if that's something we inherited because it helped our ancestors survive and succeed, then maybe a little bit of self-deception isn't just normal, maybe it's actually good for us. Something to think about. Thanks for tuning in.